we're looking at there. Yes.
Here's the webcam, by the way.
Okay, webcam's over here.
Yep.
Yes, so we want to bring them over.
I can move you guys this way.
Okay, just line up and face the webcam so everyone can see.
Can I see?
These hybrid meetings, it takes a while to figure out exactly what we're doing.
There we go.
I've been on the other side for a long time. So, you know, it's, okay, Dan, you can face either way.
Yeah, I got you.
You got him?
Yeah, I got him.
Okay, we're good.
You can do what you want.
So today's a special day for us because we're inducting a new member into Rotary. And Rotary has a long history, and this is a moment that we can take to talk a little bit about that. And Rotary started from very humble beginnings. On February 23rd, 1905, Paul Harris, who was an attorney in Chicago, called together a meeting of 4 people. He went to his friend's office in the Unity building on Dearborn Street, downtown Chicago. And 4 of them met. And the idea was that they would share ideas and talk, because at that time, Chicago was growing very rapidly, and it was becoming one of the new cities in our country. And many people were coming in from farms and from rural areas, and there was a lack of connection at the time. And he realized that. Paul Harris realized that. And so when they got together, 4 of them said, well, we're going to call this Rotary because we're going to rotate the meetings, the weekly meetings, to each other's office. So that's how Rotary got started. That's how the name of Rotary came about and how it got started. Within a year, the idea had caught on so much that they could no longer go to each other's offices, and they had to have a meeting place. From those humble beginnings in 1905, today there's over 1.2 million Rotarians, 34,000 clubs around the world, just like this, all made up of local clubs. And it's truly a global organization, but it's all made up of local clubs. It comes from the local building there. So what happened was the organization continued to grow to this today, and it's attracted people from every profession, every business, and leaders in these areas, and brought them together, and were bound together by one thing: service to others. Our mantra and what we believe is service above self. And everything that we do, that we come together, and all these other people in this room and on Zoom here, all these people are bound together from very different backgrounds, all different experiences by what we believe, and that's service above self. And so in Rotary, that's what it's about. And this idea has caught on and gone worldwide. And you know, it's interesting, especially in this time, because so many times when you watch on the news now, they'll say, this is unprecedented times. We've never seen things like this. 13 years after Rotary started in 1918, the country was coming just to the end of World War I. A war like no one had ever seen before. No one could have even imagined it. 14 people died in that. 14 million people died in that war. At the same time, when the soldiers came back, the Spanish flu pandemic started. 675,000 Americans died in that. Over 50 million people died in that. But what did Rotary do? They do what we do as Rotarians. They acted and they adapted. And that's what leaders do. That's what leadership is about. Many clubs held their meetings outside. They did exactly what we're doing now. They were doing social distancing. They wore masks. And they had 3 waves of this as it went on to 1918. And if you go to any cemeteries that have been around in this area, and you start looking at gravestones, any cemeteries that are over 100 years old right now, you will see many, many people died in 1918. And young people And you'll see that, and you're looking, you go, wow, I wonder what happened. That's what happened. But Rotarians acted and adapted. And that's what we do. And you know, when you think about Rotary and joining it, and I'm so happy, and we're also happy that you're joining us, is that this is what this group does. And I have often said, I've said this and people know this, that I've often said this, that these are the best people I have ever known and ever been associated with in this room and on that Zoom that are in this organization. And it's because people, when there's challenges, when there's struggles, when there's needs, and you hear it across the room, when there's something that's needed to be done, people say, we need to get this done, and this is the group that gets it done and adapts. And in this time, this group gives me inspiration all the time. And you know, you watch the news and you go, oh my gosh, this is going on with civil unrest, we got pandemic, we have all this stuff going on. But then I come here and I see the people in this room and I feel inspired. And that's what Rotary is about. And that's what keeps people coming here every Thursday morning, coming here on Zoom. And it's so funny because I see people year after year in this organization coming here, and they don't come here because we charge them $2 if they don't. They come here because they're inspired. And they're inspired by the people around them. And I think that Rotary brings out the absolute best of us. And when you think about, you know, the things that you do for Rotary, you say, God, it's a volunteer organization, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. It brings out the best in all of us. And I think that that's, when I talk to new members and people coming into the organization, that's the exciting thing about it. And it energizes us. And in a time when we really need people, in a time when we need this so much. So ethics has always been a big part of our Rotary too. And I won't go on too long, I don't want to go on too long on this, but I do want to talk a little bit about the four-way test. Herbert Taylor, who ended up being a Rotarian president in 1932, took over a company. And the story is worth hearing about this, about how we got to the four-way test. In 1932, and you know in 1928 there was a Great Depression. The company was, you know, in bankruptcy. And so he looked at it, became president of this company. It's in bankruptcy. And he said, I need to have a philosophy. So he wrote this 28-word four-way test. Now, other things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will build with the will, better friendships, be beneficial to all concerned. So he wrote this down. And he had one of those glass tops on his desk. Remember those things? And he slipped it out of the glass top and just this little piece of paper. And he wrote later, he said, at the end of the first day, I was so disappointed I was going to pull it out and rip it up and throw it away in the waste basket because he said, I saw all the things that my company was doing. All the, you know, and this goes back a little bit, but all the memos and the advertising, and he said, it didn't even pass the first test of is it the truth? And there were so many things in there that were not truthful. And so he said, I was just disappointed in myself. And he said, before I brought it to anyone else, I wanted to make sure that I was living up to that. So he waited, and it took him 3 or 4 months before he showed it to anyone else. Well, of course, what happened with it was after he got his stuff in order, and he was living by it, then he took it forward, took it to his company, the company went on, became a big success. He ultimately goes on and becomes the head of Rotary International, and it becomes, in 1943, the official model, Rotary we've had it. And you know, we say that every week at the end of the meeting. And when I first came to Rotary, I kind of thought, well, that's kind of hokey, you know, that they get up and they recite this. But then, over time, I've realized that it kind of focuses us. It brings us back to what's important in Rotary, what's important in life. It's just one of those moments that it just kind of brings you back, it focuses it, and you go out. So that's why we do the four-way test. And I know that your brother has the pin over here. I have the pin. And part of this ceremony is to present with you with the pin and your name thing. And we'll place that on you. And then after that, I'd like you just to do a 2-minute introduction. I don't know if you were a chance to do this, but just to tell everyone who you are and a little bit about you as well. And let's give a good Rotarian welcome to Dan. Also, we have for you a plaque for your office, and then also a shirt and some material. And I'm going to wipe off the mic, and then I will give it to you. And
All right, well, thanks everyone. A little bit about me. I'm originally from St. Paul, still relatively new to the suburbs, been in the suburbs about 8 years and still getting acclimated to that type of life. Joining this group is helping get transitioned out of the city life. I was actively volunteering probably about 6 years ago. It all started when I was binge watching TV on a Friday night, watching not good TV either. It was probably the B-rated movies, reruns, such like that, and I was thinking I should be doing more with my life. And the next morning I got up and I took the next opening slot that they had to feed my starving children, and that kind of started my volunteer goals. And then I was posting a lot of things on Facebook of what I was doing to try and inspire other people to volunteer. And Paul was in Rotary back then, and he was saying, well, you're doing a lot of the things that we do in our group. He said, you should start looking into joining a Rotary group. And I was renting back then, but now that I'm a homeowner, I kind of have roots, and I thought now's the time for me to get involved with organizations. So I look forward to not just being a member, but an active member of this group. One more thing, so we got this from, I call it the COVID key, but it does have a nice little quote on there that I thought was would be, in line with what we do here. It says, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much.
well, thank you, Dan, and again, let's give him a round of applause for our newest member, and it's a pleasure here meeting him, and then also for Ken Hunter. And I'll turn it back over to our president.
And just so you know, thanks to this COVID, Brackets Crossing has asked us to forego the spanking machine during the induction. So luck out on that. The next person that is inducted may not be so fortunate. Every once in a while in my career as having a marketing company, I get to meet some fascinating people. And one of those people, I was introduced from a mutual friend, Tom Durkin, about 5 years ago. And our friend Tom says that he had a friend, Joe, that was writing a book, and he was well into it. He finished his research stage, but perhaps he needed some marketing help. So Joe came to our office, met with Chris and myself, and in the end, as it turns out, what he probably didn't need at that time was marketing, but some PR. So we never actually worked together, but I followed him on social media, and his book is now published, and there's, I think, copies in the back. But a little bit about Joe and why I think he's so fascinating is back in the 90s, when it was fun to go to downtown Minneapolis, Joe ran and operated, owned Shea Bananas. and some other, I think you were also instrumental in getting some other restaurants going at the time. So as a way of introduction, Joe Tchaikovsky is the author of 40 Thieves on Saipan and is the son of the platoon's leader. Graduating with degrees in English literature, theater, and art history made him perfectly qualified for a life in the hospitality trade. Based in Minneapolis, his restaurant creations have earned reviews and mentions in Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, Esquire, The Rolling Stone, New York Times, and Jim Harrison's The Raw and the Cooked. So, but today he's going to be speaking about his book. So let's have a warm round of applause for Joe.
Start with a short video.
Thank God she knows.
Taking the flag kind of bothered. Kind of bothered me because it's so special, I think. And it's like it, part of him, he had it tucked into his coat, and I barely saw it. And I just about didn't take it, but then I thought, at least.
Members of his platoon. These 19 and 20-year-old boys who fought together on Saipan are now old men in their.
A little clip that explains a little bit about what went into the researching of the book, of interviewing all of these old leathernecks.
You're gonna have to use the mic, I can't, you're gonna have to pull it out.
Oh, okay.
We do it, pull it out of the, yep, there you go.
And now can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right. So the video is on the YouTube channel. If you're interested, go and look at it because it just shows the old leathernecks that I interviewed that were part of the platoon, the stories that I garnered from them, and how I was able to construct this big jigsaw puzzle of stories and memories, remembrances, and documents and things. But it all began with a eulogy that was delivered at my father's funeral. It was always apparent that he was a Marine and he'd served in the Pacific because names of places would crop up like Saipan or Guadalcanal or Tarawa, but it would be the same to me as saying something like Chicago or Los Angeles. They were just places that had real no meaning to me. But the eulogy was delivered by this fellow who got up and started talking about my dad's tenure as mayor. And but the first time that he met Dad was at the University of Wisconsin when this kid was there going to Naval ROTC, and Dad was there on the GI Bill, and he stood out because he was old. And when he went to ROTC meetings every day, there'd be this surly Marine sergeant there, his dress blues, crew cut, every inch a Marine, and very surly. If he ever had occasion to say the name, he'd just bark it out. But one day he saw this normally stoic sergeant talking to my dad. They were laughing and joking. And the guy thought it was really weird, but didn't think anything of it until he saw it happen a couple more times. And he went up to the fellow, finally, and to the sergeant and said, "Excuse me, but how do you know Frank Dahovsky?" And the sergeant snapped back, "That's Lieutenant Dahovsky to you. And when you speak of him with respect." He was our platoon leader on Saipan when a Japanese tank broke through the lines and kept advancing on us. We had no weapons to fight it with, and we were goners. There was nothing that we could do.
Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, the solitary figure runs out into the withering fire, shoots a bazooka, disables the tank, and kills the crew inside. That was the lieutenant. He saved my life that day. He saved the life of everybody in the platoon. So when you speak of him, do it with respect. So needless to say, if a pin had dropped on the carpeting at that time, you would have heard it. But what it prompted me to do was do an online search. You can go to B now. And up popped this Leatherneck website that had this article in it entitled Tahovsky's Terrors. It's from a December 1944 Leatherneck magazine. And there was a little text provided by a gentleman named Chris Tipton. And it said, "This was my father's platoon during World War II. And everything in the article is true, except they weren't known as terrors. We were known as the 40 Thieves." So even before I was thinking about writing a book, the title is
I wanted to know more about my dad and the men whose names
that
were on
prompted
that
me to open my dad's foot locker,
Scout sniper roster,
which was
they
in the
were,
garage and kind
what they
of
did, what they saw.
inviolate.
Okay,
He
9
talked
years
about the war,
for 40
there
years
some
on Saipan,
I was alive,
during that time.
I thought it was fair game, and you can go to the end.
19 and 20-year-old boys who fought
And I
on
found
Saipan are now
many things. It was a trove. There were timetables,
open with incredible stories about
Chicago to Los Angeles. But then I also found this platoon roster for the Scout and Sniper platoon. And as you can see down here at the bottom.
Well, that gives you a little background. Thank you all for coming. I'm happy to welcome Joseph Tukowski and his co-author, Cynthia Pratt. And we're all here to talk about his father's experience in World War II and the book that he's written, 40 Thieves of Saipan. I have been listening to it. We have the audiobook here in the library. It's a pretty exciting war story. Joseph, would you like to give us some idea of how you got started writing?
Montana. As opposed to my dad, who never talked about the war. Bill Knoepel was a walking, talking encyclopedia. They'd known each other since Iceland, when there was the first sort of military unit that was deployed in World War II, was to go to Iceland to replace the British troops there. They were the ones that were driven off of Dunkirk because they were needed back home in Britain in anticipation of Germany's cross-channel invasion. But so he starts telling me a whole litany of things, stories, anecdotes, funny stories. Very rarely did they ever talk about the things that they did, but they talk about what other people would do. And that prompted me to start searching the names on this list to see who else was alive. And I found many people. There was my triumvirate, besides Bill Knoepel, was a fellow named Bob Smots in Georgia, Marvin Strombo in Montana, and then Roscoe Mullins in West Virginia. And one that finally connected the stories, went all around the country, driving, because you can't fly in these places. And I ended up getting this big jigsaw puzzle of stories with using, historical documentation that I got from the National Archives in Bethesda. I was able to put the jigsaw pieces of the story together, and finally found a publisher and agent and submitted it. But these old guys, you can go to the map of Hawaii now. You're just relying on their stories. And one of the more interesting stories that they would talk about was on Hawaii. This is from Bob Smots, when they were going on this training mission in the Koala Mountains. It's kind of a fuzzy map, but you see where the little ship is in the upper left-hand corner, sort of just to the left of Mauna Kea. That's where Parker Ranch is. That's where they were training. Right beneath the little Hawaiian god are the Koala Mountains. He was telling a story about how they were going up into the Koala Mountains to live off the land for a week. And while they were on the Koala Mountains, they met this Chinese fellow who showed them a viaduct through the mountain. that had a little tunnel of water that carried sugarcane through it. And on the other side of the Koala Mountains, you see 3 little fingerlet canyons, and then the Waipio Valley. So they're over in the Waipio Valley, very verdant farmland. They start stealing fruit from, all of the farmers, and they're getting really upset about it. But the Chinese fellow also told them that in the 3 fingerlet canyons, Japanese submarines used to dock. They do it all the time. And they would be supplied by the little village of Pololu, which is just north of those 3 fingerlet canyons. And Pololu was declared off limits by the FBI because it was filled with Japanese sympathizers and spies. And the head spy was a woman who ran the general store. And it was so much so off limits that all of the men had been sent to internment camps. And the whole population consisted of women and children. So these guys decide to go in. They're 18, 19-year-old boys. And as soon as they walk in, the woman who owns the general store sees them and immediately hooks them up with a bunch of girlfriend types. And they start fraternizing and having this great time. And they have a little bit of money on them. And there's ice cream, there's beer, and they're just living it up in this off-limits village. Until the head of the Hawaiian Home Guard hears about it, which didn't take long. And he took them to his house, told them they better get back to camp, and he was going to tell Holland and Smith about it. Okay. So that's the story that I've been told. After the book has been sent to the publisher, a fellow named Richard Zuziak, his father's name is on the roster, his name is John Zuziak, asked me if I'd like to see his father's photographs from the war. And I said, sure. But normally these war photographs are all USMC issued. Everyone who fought on Guadalcanal had the same photos, same on Tarawa, same on Saipan, because it was illegal to carry a camera with you. But Bill Campbell had a little camera that he carried in his pocket, and he'd take some photos. And obviously, Richard Zuziak had a camera as well. So go to that first image of, that's just the numbers. So obviously, Richard Zuziak's dad was on this mission into Pololu. So this is just a stock photograph of the Sweeto airfield. This is what I thought I was going to be getting. And then you can go to the next one. And this is just a photo of, if you could go back. This is just a photo of guys landing, right? No. The face in the center is John Zuziak in the platoon. The fellow just almost off camera, that's my dad. And the fellow, very cavalier, in the resting his head on his neck, is a fellow named Don Evans. He was nominated Mr. Kansas City not once, but twice. And he unfortunately died on Saipan. So then you can go to the one past the map. So he was on this mission in Poland. This is the guys. The fellow standing over here is a fellow named William Knight. He was a squad leader. Then there's Jesus, the Ipana kid, Orozco. Ipana was a brand of toothpaste, and he evidently had a very brilliantly white smile. And then the other fellow is Wild Bill Emmerich. He was a club fighter out of Chicago who boasted once that he had beaten King Lewinsky, who was another club fighter. But there you see, there's just women and children and some of the 40 thieves. So the next thing is the girlfriend types that they were introduced to. There they are. It was like Christmas, it started to tingle to have this old guy's story verified with photographic evidence. They even gave them Americanized names, which I thought was really cute. And they're just such pretty young girls. And when the story was told to me, they were sort of painted as, geishas, we always take a little negative, but a geisha is basically just a well-trained hostess who can entertain and, you know, it's like a waitress, basically. But there's a little salacious connotation that we put to them. So I had written these girls as that. So I had to go back in and seeing this photographic evidence. I had to change it all because they're just such pretty young things, and they were having fun too. They actually gave the guys 8x10 glossy photographs of themselves when they left. And there's one of Mildred, I think. You can go to the next one. And the head spy took such good care of these guys that they called her mom. You know, I just think that, to me, this is just amazing to have these photographs come into possession. You can go to the next one. And there they are at the head of the Hawaiian Home Guard, having coffee before they have to go back to camp. So you can go to the next one as well. And this is one of the more funny things, because I see this image and it just makes me laugh every time. That Warren H. Tipton, the fellow whose son posted the article, Bob Smots had to deal with him because he was the only guy in the platoon who had never had combat experience. So they had hooked Warren Tipton up with Bob Smots. And Bob always said, we had a nickname for him. I forget what it was. It began with an H or something. And maybe it was Herman. But for Warren H. Tipton, the H stands for Hobart. And that is Warren H. Tipton. When we first wrote about the kid from Detroit, you know, it was just a scrawny kid. Look at that big overgrown lummox of a smiling goof who was just, as Don Evans wrote in a letter home about Warren Tipton, that he was just happy as hell to be there. And you can see that from that kid. So I had all of these new photographs came in that prompted a rewrite before it had even, you know, while it was still in the editing process and going to be printed. So all of these things are just wondrous events of the discovery of writing and creating the book. But I could go on for days about this, but if anybody has specific questions about, you know, the book, basically the concept of the book is the Scout Sniper Platoon was the first special operations platoon. There are only 2 such units deployed by the Marines in the Pacific during World War II, one on Tarawa, and Tarawa was just basically a 3-day, 72-hour bloodbath. The battle for Saipan took almost a month, and they were trained to live and work behind enemy lines, where firing a weapon might be their last option. So they were trained in a lot of very gruesome silent killing techniques. And they, like I said, worked behind enemy lines. The first line of the article was that they wreaked havoc in, around, and behind the lines. So they were precursors basically to Green Berets. They were kind of like the grandfathers of the Green Berets, which made them very novel at the time. And it's very uncommon for a unit as small as a platoon, which is only 40 members, to be written about at all. And these guys had 3 articles written about them in Leatherneck magazines and Marine Corps Chevron. And all of these things are something that I discovered after my dad passed away. So I really never knew about his service at all, but learned it from the men with whom he served. Unfortunately, there's only one left now, and that's Roscoe Mullins in West Virginia. Marvin Strombo. I don't know if you remember, maybe 3 years ago, there was a Marine who returned Yosagaki Hinamaru, a good luck flag, to a family in Japan, made almost worldwide news. That was Marvin Strombo. He was part of the platoon. He acquired the flag on a covert mission into Garapan, the capital city of Saipan. So that's in the book, as well as him returning the flag. So I'll stop boring you right now, and if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
It sounds very similar to the SOG soldiers, the Studies and Observation Group in Vietnam. They were kind of the elite from the Rangers and Green Berets and stuff. And they got inserted behind enemy lines. Did they go in without tags then when they were operation?
What they would do is they were equipped a little bit differently. They didn't wear clunky boondockers. They all wore sneakers. So they could be more stealthy. They would tape their dog tags so they wouldn't clank or clatter while they would move around. And they wouldn't wear their steel helmets. They'd wear more of a soft cap that Strombo said was more like a Civil War cap that they would wear behind enemy lines when they would go in. But they would still have their dog tags on.
How many men that your father served with did you interview?
There were 5 in all. One of them, Venancio Valenciano, whose nickname was Val, lived in Arizona and had dementia at the time. So I really didn't want to talk to him much about his experiences, because one thing that was common among the men is that even at 80 and 90 years old, every one of them still had nightmares of war and combat. They were very gracious about opening old wounds and even telling me their nightmares. So I was able to weave some of the nightmares into the book and the telling of their stories. And I didn't want, if this man was struggling, trying to remember, the last thing that I wanted to do was to have him remember those things and then have nightmares, because anything could trigger the nightmare, from a word that they heard to a sound or a smell. And I remember Sandy Strombo, Marvin's daughter, telling me about a time when she had heard her father in his room, and she went in and she tried to wake him up, and the next thing she knew, she was unconscious, out in the hallway, because he had just, kicked her through the door because he thought she was Japanese. Alma Smat's bride, and they knew each other before the war when they were 14, 15. They met at an Alice Chalmers tractor show in Oklahoma. And she told me that it was really great that I had been talking to Bob and that he talked to me. And she told me that as a young bride, she would frequently wake up to Bob choking her. Imagine being an 18-year-old girl, and having that happen to you by your husband. And imagine this husband, how do you explain what you've been through? But he was in combat with the Japanese. It was his nightmare of where he sees his best buddy, Daniel Kenny, get killed, point blank. And then he starts chasing the Japanese through the elephant grass. And he finally captures one. And that's where she is always at when she wakes up to him choking her. Eventually she found the early warning signs to the nightmare's onset, and she could wake him before the nightmare actually began. But basically that's why I didn't want to bother Val.
Is there any interest from filmmakers in your story? It sounds like it's the basis for a pretty interesting movie.
Well, I hope so. but as we all know, things are pretty shut down right now. So, Hollywood is pretty dormant. But I would imagine that if it could get into the hands of, if anybody knows anyone out there, filmmakers, certainly, rattle their cage for us, because it would be greatly appreciated. That's kind of what we need now, is word of mouth, somebody telling something to somebody else, because I missed out on VJ Day. Victory over Japan was just today, the 3rd?
Today's third.
Yeah, it was just yesterday. And I was at an event in Milwaukee at the War Memorial Center there. And I was supposed to do a 4-day book signing there for the event. I was looking forward to that, but it all got kiboshed because of the virus. And we have to be a little bit more creative of how we, try to market this book. Yes.
Saipan had a large Japanese civilian population. I was wondering, did they have any Green Raiders have any interaction with the Japanese civilians?
that was one of the other things that this platoon would do. They clear out pockets of resistance. The caves were a very dicey situation because inside could either be starving Chamorros who've been there for a week or more without water or food, or there could be a Japanese soldiers in there, waiting to pounce. But that was one thing that was unique about the battle was in fact I have the pamphlet and it looks like the Marines are going on a holiday. It's a Saipan and they're like little happy Japanese people and they're Marines in uniform. But it was basically, this is the first time that in the Pacific there would be a civilian population to deal with. And how we conduct ourselves moving forward is going to be very important to the perception of the Americans and being, that they're just not massacring everybody. That they are, being kind to the civilians and taking care of them. So there was a big Japanese population, and they even got a little index card of Japanese phrases that, would be phonetically, they just tell them,
Did they witness any of the mass suicides that took place?
Yep, on Market Point. In fact, it was very interesting that these guys would not bat an eye when they would talk about Daniel Kennedy getting killed, or Don Evans, or Martin Dyer. But when they would talk about what they saw on Market Point, they all started to break down, where they just couldn't talk about it. And Market Point was the greatest mass suicide ever, where the retreating Imperial Army and civilians were condensed on the northern end of Saipan at a cliff, very, very steep and perilous cliff. And the Japanese had so brainwashed the civilian population that the Marines would commit such horrible atrocities upon them and their babies. They thought it was better to kill themselves and their children than to surrender. And there's some pretty horrific YouTube videos out there of women throwing their infants off the cliffs and following them. And that's what these guys saw.
Hopefully there's an upbeat question.
Does anybody online have a?
Do we have any questions online?
None?
None.
All right. Nothing else, I'll turn it back to Steve.
One moment, please, John. Thank you. And as we do with guest speakers, we give a coin with our four-way test. And to save time, we would, as a group, do it, but we'll be doing that at the end of the program too. And then an honorarium will be given in your name to Treehouse, which is an organization that serves at-risk teenagers in the metro. So thank you. And another hand of thank you. Jim Christian, Sergeant at Arms.
Who's gonna need that?
I'll use the mic.
Thank you.
What's the website where you can donate to the club?
LvlRotary.org.
Oh, what's the one though? It doesn't cost any money though.
Oh, Venmo.
Venmo.
Yeah.
So for those virtual, pin check, and and you just go on to Venmo and what do you type in?
It's my cell phone number. So it's Lvl Rotary Foundation, and they'll need to know 3449.
3449 is the number for the Venmo. So if you're going to make your contribution now, very timely, do it. So for those here, who made it to the picnic? Raise your hand. I made it as well, and there's no fine if you didn't make it. But Doug Anderson, so thank you, Doug. Doug, are you still on? Oh, there he is. I see his hand. Oh, there you are. We did a little bit of a cruise on Colleen and Tom's pontoon boat in the night. It was beautiful. We did 2 loops, and thanks to Doug, he narrated some of the history of Lakeville, which was really informative. And so today's questions are going to be on some of the Lakeville history. And the first one I've always been confused by because I didn't really know what Argonne Farms was. So these 2 tables, there's going to be a couple questions in here you'll ultimately pay. So what year did Argonne Farms, it was a project that was for disabled World War I veterans, where they should live, which was located on Highway 50, on the north side of Highway 50. What year did Argonne Farms start? I was on that boat. You were on that boat. Well, this wasn't one of the questions that Doug had. He inspired me to do this. Chris, what did you have?
It's got to be between World
Mark?
War II, so 19 what? 1927.
1927, close, 1922. And it was located from Highway, oh, it was on Highway 50, but it was from 172nd Street to 180th. And then the project actually ended in the Great Depression. So we're going to do these 3 tables. Ritter Farm Park, the largest park in Lakeville. And that farm was purchased by the Caleb Tingley family, 9 members in that family, pretty big. They had purchased the farm in the late 1800s. How large was that farm, or is that farm today? Give within 50 acres.
Mr. Bonoff probably knows. I think 640.
Wow, that's close. Yeah, it was 400 acres on the south side and 232 on the north side, so. Yeah, oh, well, no, I mean, it was within 50, so yeah, you got it. Absolutely, you got it. So it's on the north and south side of Lake Marion, which was known as what lake? Prairie Lake. Good.
Oh, that's it.
No, it's not it. Everybody thinks today. So the Gordon family then bought the land because they bought it in the late 1800s, and then the Gordon family bought the land in the mid 1930s. And then this is something that Doug had shared with us in 1938. There was so much rain, the lake overflowed its basin and flooded the roads. And it turned out, I didn't realize there was a road that went across where where you used to be able to drive, and then it flooded and it stayed flooded since then. So then in 1938, Carl and Andrea Christensen purchased the farm and named it Oak Hills Farm, built a main home, machine shed, hog barn, hay shed, chicken coop, and cow barn. In 1950, the farm was purchased by the Ritter Farm for how much money, you think? 632 acres. In 1950, purchased by the Ritter family for how much? 18,000 on the spot. And it was renamed.
Give up, Jim.
I'm not giving up. I'm not getting to my last few sentences here, though. I'm getting a little nervous. It was renamed what? The Ritter family had bought it for 18,000. Amazing. Good job. And it was renamed what? Last name was Gardens. First. Nope. Guernsey Gardens. They raised sheep, and then in 1972, the city of Lakeville purchased the property from the Ritters for $400,000, and with the understanding the still living Ritter family members could remain on the property until their deaths. The last person to die was Alma Ritter in 1989, and of course that is the largest park in Lakeville. Last one, Red Fox Tavern. So It was formerly called what at the very beginning? Before Red Fox. This is in the early 60s, by the way. Early 60s. Any guesses? Joe's Bar. No, it was actually Europa Park. In the early 60s, Clarence Will had a dream and purchased the property along Pillsbury Avenue, which was formerly known as Highway 65, and created Europa Park. It included kiddie rides, area for skiing, tobogganing, skating. A restaurant named Edelweiss Alm was built in 1964, patterned after a German music box chalet, and featured Bavarian beer, bratwurst, apple strudel, hot chocolate, and polka music. The property was sold in the late 60s, and the restaurant became the Black Stag Inn. In 1972, the business name became Maggie's County Line. Then in the 1980s, it became G&L's Lounge. I don't know if you know Gary Lyons, he's still alive. And then it became Red Fox Tavern. And there was a unique form of parking when it was G&L's Lounge. What was that unique type of parking that G&L's had? It was a hitching post. People used to ride and hitch up their horses there. In fact, one of the stories that Gary told me, they had one of their guests come in on horseback and rode into the restaurant on the horse. He was intoxicated as well. So,
You had questions for them, or did you answer all of them?
no, I did. It was pin check. That was the whole thing. So, reflection dollars, happy dollars. All right. Any? Did we have one? No. No one's happy. How about from our Zoomers? Any happy dollars or reflection dollars to share?
I can do two happy dollars. This is Doug. One is my dear wife, pardon me, my dear wife Deb and I celebrated our 42nd wedding anniversary last week. And secondly, and this was commented on by some of the folks on Zoom earlier, Deb and I did our one-time water skiing this past week, and we can still get up on one ski and have a nice ski and have a good time. So that's awesome.
Thank you, Doug. Any happy reflection dollars here? Any quiet? I'll turn it back over. Oh, did we have one?
Ticket.
Oh, a ticket. Yeah, thank you. Could you read the last three digits? This is for $10. 798. We'll draw one more. No 798. Seven. Mark Booth, the lucky winner. Back to you, Mr. President.
See what happens when you show up every few months? Gee, what? The truth, yes.
Okay. Now, in the interest of time, we will wind down and do the 4-week test. And online too. In the things we think, say, and do, is the truth. Thank you. Be safe out there.